This extraordinarily moving painting was recently acquired by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The artist is Melchor Perez Holguín. We see Mary and Christ who has come down from the cross, and he is surrounded by mourning or grieving angels. When the painting arrived at the museum, I was, of course, astounded by what I saw, this very rich painting in this very unique style of painting. And I felt that it was in good condition, even though there are problems that we need to address in the restoration. There are a number of losses. I mean, we have losses such as this, when the painting was folded. And then also there are some strips of loss here that seem to indicate that the painting was rolled at one time. In addition, the surface was covered with dirt and old varnish. And there is not just one old varnish of discoloration, but there are several layers. Some of them are gray, and so some type of different coating. But in order to properly clean this painting, we need to do an analysis of these different layers of varnish and see what they are and how best to remove them. So far, we've removed dirt and the superficial varnish from the surface of the painting, and we have applied another varnish to help to saturate the colors and bring out the forms so that we can see what all the forms are. I think you can see that in the robe of the Virgin that some of the lighter areas of the folds where they come out contrast much better with the darker areas where the folds roll in, so that the form of the cloth, it looks more natural as the artist intended. But then there are other layers of varnish, some of them just partial and over certain figures that need to be resolved. These varnishes, such as we see in this gray area of the figure here, appear to be an early type of coating. And with our analysis, we will be able to hopefully identify what that is and determine if it was original or not. And then we can decide how we are going to deal with that. In terms of the cleaning, the Christ figure is a bit problematic. The arm had a natural resin varnish that was easily identified, and I was able to remove that. And one can see that the body is pale in this area, as one would expect, because he is dead and he's just come down from the cross. There is, over other parts of the figure, this yellowish or warm tone. And this is something we still need to identify to find out if it is actually some kind of tone or if it is a varnish that has discolored. It could have been original. The artist could have toned the body. I don't think that's the case here, because it would be unlikely that Christ would be this color. But, and especially since this arm is pale. But it's very likely, I think, that this was put on later, maybe as a tone because someone thought he was too pale, or either this may be a discolored varnish that was on the paint, that was remained on the painting. Cross sections have also been helpful in understanding not only what the ground structure is and the paint layers, but also the varnishes. And with the use of cross sections, we were able to see numerous layers and determine what is the latest one, the layer on top that we could remove at this time.
This was one of the first Bolivian paintings that we examined. So we were interested to take a look at the pigments and see a little bit more about the artist's technique. And the cross sections really can show things like that. The lowest ground, as you see over here, is a grayish color. It's got a lot of black pigments in it. The black pigments we found are all plant material. And on top of this grey ground, which has beautiful little yellow pigments that we're going to analyse and find out what they are, is a sort of a more reddish layer. It's very, very similar to the grey, so they've bonded very well. They're in UV, it's difficult to tell them apart. It's hard to see where the line of demarcation might be. On top of that, we've got some green layers here. The artist seems to have treated the greens and built them up in different ways. And this particular green is very vivid. It's almost a blue-green in color. And if you can imagine the green being laid on top of the warm ground, the warmth, the reds and yellows in that ground would essentially kill the green and make it look browner. So what the artist has done here, and it's very interesting, it's a very thin layer of grey. It was probably a very dark grey, maybe bluish in tone, and it's laid in directly on top of the upper ground layer. And it provides a base for this intense green glaze, which is somewhat transparent, and that's laid on top. And as a result, it would have held its color, its intensity, because it was laid on a grey underlayer. And that shows quite a lot of sophistication. On top of that is a section of mordant gilding. As you can see from the green robe, there's a lot of decorative elements done with gold leaf, and they are laid in on top of a mordant which is very red in color. It's very, very thick. It's got a number of red pigments in it, probably lakes, but also some other more opaque reds. One of the main figures that has blue is, of course, the Virgin Mary. And again, her cloak is decorated with mordant gilding again. So in this cross section I have, you can see the gold layer, the gold leaf on the very, very top. It's sort of a little bit reflective in this light. The mordant again, very thick, very red. And then below that is what we thought was the blue layer. In this cross section, it looks very black. And then below that are the two ground layers that we've seen in most of the other cross sections. Well, when we examined this blue layer with ultraviolet light, you can see that it's made up of actually two layers. And on the bottom is a very, very dark, it's opaque. Pigments are ground a little finer than in other sections, and it's very dark. And then directly on top of that is this highly fluorescent layer, and it has these large glassy chunks of blue pigment in it. This area was analysed with XRF by our conservation scientist, and she detected cobalt. So this is, of course, smalt blue pigment, which is a glassy pigment. It's difficult to see in many of the cross sections, but it shows up here in ultraviolet light really beautifully.
One of the techniques that we use to determine and be able to identify different pigments on the painting is called a false color IR image. So we combine a visible image with an infrared image, and the combination of those two generates a false color environment in which different pigments react differently on their IR, infrared radiation, and then they represent themselves in the false color environment as a different color. So in this case, we have two blues. On the visible lighting condition, we can see that the Virgin is only one blue, but once we actually combine the two images and make the false color, we're able to see that the image has two shades that are different. One is a red shade, one is a reddish color, and the other one is a blackish color. So that by itself let us know that there's two blues being used. One that is being represented by the red color on one side, and the other one on the right side we have that is blackish, so it's a different type of blue. The imaging at the very beginning of the process really helps determine where is the best area to do this probing, because we could have been probing on only one side and determine that only one blue was being used. Imaging really helps you map the painting completely and being able to determine, oh, this area here is interest, this area here is of interest, this area here is of interest, and then go ahead and do the work for those. Another question that was posed to us is one about iconography in the painting itself. We see that in the top right corner of the painting showing a depiction of the moon. And it was thought stylistically that on the left side we'll also find another element, which is the sun. And the sun will be on the top left corner of the painting, which we are not able to see very clearly. Through imaging, we're trying to then determine if we can actually find that sun, if we're able to determine that that iconographic dichotomy will actually be there, since historically paintings like this will always have the two elements. So through X-rays and infrared raking photography and UV fluorescence photography, we try to determine if we can see any traces of that sun being taking place there. Through some of the imaging, we were able to maybe pan that out, but it's not as clear cut as we wanted it to be. But that was one of the other questions that we were after.
The restoration is continuing, and we are continuing our analysis of the materials in the painting to inform the restoration. Another important tool we're going to use was generously offered to us by the Getty Conservation Institute. This instrument does mapping of the pigments in the picture, and with it we can see almost the layers of paint, and also see the form of its brushstrokes and how they change over the painting. The painting will first be shown in an exhibition next year that will be here at LACMA, and it will be an exhibition of Spanish colonial art. This will be a chance to evaluate and see how the painting fits into our colonial paintings collection.